Eddie C. Brown is the founder and president of Brown Capital Management, one of the oldest African-American owned investment management firms in the United States, and author of Beating the Odds, Eddie Brown's Investing and Life Strategies, published by Wiley. In this 10-episode podcast series titled Beating the Odds, an interview with Eddie Brown, Mr. Brown sits down with Deborah Owens, wealth coach, author, and radio host, to discuss life lessons, educational values, personal and career philosophies, financial ingenuity, and giving back. In this podcast episode, Eddie Brown discusses the influence that his environment and family had on his educational journey. Join us as we hear about some pivotal life moments which charted his eventual path.
That's interesting. You know, you mentioned your grandmother and your mother leaving home at 15. Can you share a little bit about your grandmother and how you feel she really influenced your foundational years, certainly, and how you reflect on the influence that she had on you as you went on in your career?
Yeah, it was my grandmother, but also my grandfather. They were both common laborers. My grandmother, as I said, in these large nurseries, plant growing. My grandfather in the citrus groves, just doing manual labor, hoeing around trees and so forth. So very early, my grandmother would take me over to the big city, Orlando, Florida. And she would, even on the weekends, she would show me people sitting behind desks, with white shirts and ties. And she said, if you stay in school and if you do well, you too can sit behind a desk and wear a white shirt and tie and not be out in the fields like we are. So that was embedded in my mind, that I did not want to be out in the fields, and I wanted to sit behind a desk with a tie and white shirt. And the only question was, how would I do it? Well, as I went through school, these teachers just kept saying, "You're very smart. You're very smart." In fact, I have a photo that's in a book I have that's coming out, and it's of my third grade class and a third grade teacher. And on my chest was a little sign that said King, and the young girl next to me was Queen. So even in third grade, I was anointed as the king. So it was kind of building very positive images and expectations and the importance of staying in school, getting a good education to lead to a better life. And it was really in the 10th grade. I remember this English teacher said to me, "Eddie, you are very smart and you have to go to college." And I graduated from, this is the teacher from Howard University in Washington, D.C., and I want you to go to Howard. So after I moved to Allentown when I was in 11th grade, when this phone call came and my mother came down, plucked me up without notice and took me away to Allentown, Pennsylvania, the big change there, and I didn't know this at the time, there were two things that would happen to a young African American from the South. The first thing is you would be put back a grade because it was automatically assumed that you were not up to par with the Northern educational system. The second thing was they would try to railroad you as an African American into the trades, electrician, carpentry, industrial arts, something that's not academic. Well, when that happened, fortunately, my mother, who didn't get out of middle school, she had enough sense to know that if I was not in a college preparatory track, how am I going to go to college? And if I was put back a grade, I was at the top of my class consistently through the 10 years of schooling in Florida. Again, how was I going to be on track to go to college? So she fought the system, school system, and fortunately, I was not put back a grade, and I was put into college prep. Now, I'm saying all that because as I got through 11th grade and 12th grade and started to think about, as I said, this was no question I was going to go to college. The only question was how we were going to pay for it. But I was going to college, and I only applied to one college or university because I didn't know anything about colleges or universities. And that was, I remember this 10th grade teacher, English teacher, that said Howard University, so I applied to Howard. And fortunately, you know, I got accepted into Howard. I didn't know anything about careers or what I should do or take or major in college. So I took this series of tests in high school from the guidance counselor, and there were certain things that were showing up, and that is good problem-solving ability, good critical thinking. And she said, you know, you should go into engineering. And I would always tinker around with electronics, putting kits together, you know, making various things electronically. And she said, you maybe should go into electrical engineering. So the choice of college or university, the choice of major in college was not something that was long planned. It was something that just happened. So I did go to Howard University. And the way I went to Howard, we had a kind of a civic or community leader in this little section where most of the blacks lived in Allentown. And his name was Mr. Rohn. And Mr. Rohn came to me one day, and this was my senior year in high school, and he said, Eddie, he said, Mrs. So-and-so has come to me, and she has said that she would like to provide a scholarship, full scholarship, to a black student who's interested in going to college. And I know that you're planning to go to college. You don't have the means or the funds. And I told her that I have the perfect person. His name is Eddie Brown. And this person that I never met, every year from my freshman year through my senior year, she sent a check. She would not give me the money, but she sent a check to Howard University for me. Monies could be drawn from that account to pay for tuition, books, lodging. At that time, in fact, I went back and checked this, the tuition at Howard University was $104 per semester. She put in $1,000 every year, so I had monies to pay full tuition, meals, room and board, everything for the full 4 years. So you're talking about, you know, paths, forks, lucky breaks.
So the question becomes, though, how did that civic leader identify you and know that you had a desire to attend college?
You know, that's a good question. And if you think about, well, you wouldn't know this, but my graduating class at Allentown High School, I think there were 753 students. So it was a very large high school. In fact, at the time, it was the only public, non-religious high school, you know, in the city of Allentown. Out of that 753 in the graduating class, there were only 3 blacks that were college prep. So it became a very narrow universe. Fortunately, of the 3, the other 2 were from middle-class families. So when Mr. Rohn kind of looked at academic achievement and need, there was only one. So it made it a very simple choice and decision.
And you were always told that you were smart.
You know what? I believed it.
Yes.
Because I was told it so often, it just built my confidence. And
so I think the question becomes, you know, we always hear nature, nurture, you know. So many people who maybe come from backgrounds that aren't middle class and maybe their parents did not attend college can sometimes feel inadequate and not because they don't have the potential, but just because they weren't, you know, nurtured, if you will, and they didn't have a coach or someone to tell them. So the question becomes, you're taken from you know, Apopka.
correct.
And you land in Allentown. Your mother is not well educated.
That's correct.
And yet you were still able to perform well. Was it that foundational education that you had coming up that really prepared you to be able to succeed in this new environment?
Yes, that is exactly correct. Because when I look back at the fellas that were my friends and that, you know, I hung around with, not a single one had any desire to go to college. So it was not the people that were my friends and that I hung around with. For example, all through high school, well, I came to Allentown, as I said, in 11th grade, so in high school, I became friends with these fellas, and we formed a singing group. And we used to sing on the street corner. The problem was I, you know, could read music, but I could not play, you know, without music. And of course, you know, one guy could do the drums, and they wanted me to play the sax and sing, but I couldn't just play, you know, without the music on the street corner. But I did become a member of the Cool Tones. And the lead singer of that group went on to form or reconstitute a group after I'd gone on to college. And they ended up with 2 gold records. And the group was called Jay and the Techniques. And their first gold record was Apple Peaches Pumpkin Pie. And the second gold record was Keep the Ball Rolling. And Jay's group was one of the in the early 60s, was one of the first integrated groups in the United States. And he was smart enough, you know, to put together behind him a white band. The musicians were white. And a fella who was part of our singing group later reconstituted, nicknamed Lucky, African American. So the 2 singers were basically African American, but they had a white band. So therefore, they got onto the Dick Clark, you know, bandstand and Ed Sullivan show, and you know, they were kind of a big deal back in that time. Jay and the Techniques. But so none of my friends went to college, had no interest in college. So it was kind of that early upbringing, image, nurturing. It was no question, you know, that was my goal, and I was determined one way or another to go to college and get a good education so I could sit behind that desk, you know, with a white shirt and tie. So that was in my brain.
Yeah, you know, your grandmother and your grandfather raised you your early years, and your grandmother passed.
That's correct.
And I wonder how difficult was that for you in your ability to still hold on to what were clearly her dreams for you?
Yeah, it was totally unexpected. My grandmother had never been